Today I am here to announce that Judge Charlene Olmedo held David Anthony Burke, who goes by the name David spelled d4vd, to answer for the horrific and barbaric killing of a 14-year-old at the time, Celeste Rivas Hernandez.
That's DA Nathan Hochman out of LA talking after the conclusion of David's preliminary hearing. We are going to tell you what the court decided regarding whether or not this accused child killer is going to go to trial. And we just got a really big glimpse into what this defense may be. And I will tell you right now, it is shocking. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse.
She's 13 years old, and she's texting the man she loves, threatening to expose him because he's already moved on to someone else. That's the last real conversation anyone has before Celeste Rivas Hernandez disappears. And I need you to sit with that for a second before we go any further. This week, a judge in Los Angeles looked at the evidence against David Anthony Burke, the musician known as d4vd, and made a decision. Sufficient cause. That's the legal phrase.
Hernandez, we know her dismembered, decomposed remains were found in a Tesla out in an LA tow yard back in September of 2025. A Tesla allegedly registered to David. And the purpose of this hearing over the last several days was to determine if there is sufficient probable cause.
But what it actually means is this. A judge who heard everything, the text messages, the Tesla records, the autopsy findings, looked at all of it, and said yes, this goes to trial. Murder, continuous sexual abuse of a child, unlawful mutilation of human remains. And here's the part nobody's talking about yet. In the middle of all that, the defense quietly previewed something that should turn your stomach. Self-defense. They're laying groundwork to argue that a grown man, in his own home, was somehow defending himself against a 13-year-old girl.
We've talked about a couple different defenses that attorneys have been, I think, either laying the foundation for or exploring as a potential option if or when this does go to trial. And I think this self-defense argument may be the one they have the strongest foundation for right now. As to the point you're making about physical assaults from Celeste, that was actually stricken from the court record this morning. The judge explained she is the victim here. She is not being charged with assaults. So until this goes to trial and the defense is presenting a self-defense argument, that's simply irrelevant. But that did come up, and it sounds like there may be evidence relating to that we could hear at a later date. But to your point too, Jesse, about that surveillance footage or lack thereof, absolutely. I mean, there is irrefutable hard evidence for so many other things, right? Phone records, Tesla records, text messages that spell out what people were saying and doing at specific times. There is no surveillance footage actually showing David or Celeste going into or coming out of the Doheny Place home where he was staying at the time. The LAPD detective, Corey Farrell, the final witness for the prosecution during this preliminary hearing, he spoke to that today. And he laid out what I thought was a very reasonable explanation. He says by the time they tried to access that security system to search for that video, it had been so long, it had been months, and the system simply overwrote itself. It wasn't stored there anymore. Now, we don't know if somebody may have gone back and deleted that. We don't know if the cameras may have been turned off during that time.
We all knew something was wrong the moment her dismembered remains turned up in the front trunk of a Tesla sitting in a tow yard. You already suspected this wasn't going to be a clean story. And you were right. Let's go back to the beginning, because that's where this case actually starts making sense. Celeste was 12 years old when this relationship began, according to what prosecutors laid out in court. 12. Not 18. Not a mistaken age on a dating app bio. 12, turning 13, turning 14, and never seeing 15. David Anthony Burke had a name for the operations where he'd get her to run away from her home in Lake Elsinore to come see him. He called it Operation Awesome. Think about that phrase for a second. A grown man giving a code name to the act of pulling a child away from her family. He talked to her about marriage, about having twins one day. Text records show him telling a 13-year-old, "If you have twins, great, because we wanted 2 kids anyway.
Like Elsinore, at David's prompting, he called that OA. He had a name for those runaway operations. He called them Operation Awesome. He was talking to her over text in records that we've seen. He was talking to her about getting married, starting a family. He told her over text, you know, if you have twins, great, because we wanted 2 kids anyway. She was 13 years old when they were having those conversations.
And Celeste's family in court today was listening to all this?
They were. Her parents, Jesus and Mercedes, they walked in a little bit late. They came in around 10 in the morning, and they're sitting through this testimony. They're sitting there through closing statements, and we feel their presence.
By the way, how is David acting and behaving in court today?
He's so interesting to watch, Jesse, because the responses, the reactions, I think you would expect from somebody in his position. We're not seeing those. I'm sitting at an angle, maybe about 15 to 20 feet behind him, so I can see from the side his facial expressions. You know, he walked in this morning, he was smiling, laughing a little bit, sidebarring with his...
This is documented. This is in the record. This isn't rumor. This isn't speculation. This is what prosecutors read into evidence in open court. And here's where it gets interesting, because the family knew things. Not everything, but things. Her parents, her aunts, her cousins, her older sister. They knew Celeste was spending time with him, going to the mall, going to the movies. And the DA made something very clear in court, something you need to hear directly. It does not matter what her family knew. It does not matter what she told him about her age. None of that erases what he's accused of doing to a child. None of it. Now here's where the story turns, because on April 23rd, 2025, something shifted. Celeste sent David a string of messages. Angry ones. She'd seen posts online of him with another woman, an LA influencer named Asia Collins. She threatened to tell his mother. Threatened to reach out to people on his management team. Threatened to leak what she had on him.
And she asked to show the court additional messages from that same conversation. That's where we started to get a little bit more color about the argument that has been referenced previously in the prosecution's charging documents. This is where we actually saw text messages from Celeste to David threatening him. Let me paraphrase for you some of this. In those messages that were shown to the court, that Detective Farrell read to us, Celeste tells David that she's going to ruin his career. She tells him that she's going to tell her father lies about him. She tells him that she has contact information for his business associates and for his mother. She tells him that she's going to call his mother, Colleen Burke, and tell her damaging information about David. Now, we previously have not seen these messages. We didn't really have a sense of exactly what was said in the argument between David and Celeste leading up to the night of April 23rd, when she allegedly died at his hands. So hearing this now and seeing all of this actually in print on the overhead monitor in the courtroom, it adds a little bit more color and life to this.
And to be clear, the reason this matters, it not only is potentially going to support the prosecution's narrative that he lured her there.
He told her he was busy, told her his parents were in town, that he had a trip to Singapore coming up. She pushed. She demanded to see him in person. And eventually, he gave in. He arranged her Uber himself, an 80-mile ride from Lake Elsinore straight to his home in the Hollywood Hills. She arrived just after 10 that night. She texted him to let her in.
We had LAPD Detective Corey Farrell back on the stand, talking about this plethora of text messages between David and Celeste. Thousands of messages. This is something that we were waiting to see. Talked about it on Friday, the images, the text messages. But today, he talked about the conversation leading up to April 23rd, when prosecutors claim David killed Celeste, talk to me about what those conversations were.
This was so fascinating to me, Jesse, because opposing counsel here, the prosecution and the defense, they're presenting the exact same digital evidence here. They're presenting the same text message conversation between David and Celeste. And based on what these different attorneys are essentially cherry picking from these conversations, we are getting a very different view of what happened between the two of them and what was said the night before Celeste was allegedly killed. Now, first we heard from Beth Silverman, deputy DA prosecuting this case. When she had this LAPD detective, Corey Farrell, on the stand, they presented select text messages from hundreds, thousands of messages between the two during these 2 or 3 nights. And they were meant to basically just establish time, location, the two of them arguing, the two of them coordinating when and where to meet up, the two of them deciding on a pickup location for the Uber, and then Celeste alerting David when she apparently got into his home just after 10 o'clock in the evening on April 23rd, 2025, and asking him to let her in. So very basic facts there, just establishing the two of them were communicating, they were planning on meeting up, and Celeste said in her text message to David that she had arrived.
And that's the last confirmed communication anyone has from Celeste Rivas Hernandez. Now stay with me here, because this next part matters more than almost anything else in this entire case. There is no surveillance footage. None. Not of her walking in. Not of anyone walking out. The detective testified that by the time investigators tried to pull the footage, months had passed, and the system had simply recorded over itself.
All we know is there is no video. So what the prosecution has been alleging this whole time, that David stood by and watched the victim bleed out, well, there's no video documenting that. So we have to wonder, Jesse, if they're going to call another witness to the stand during the trial, who can say that they saw that happen.
Well, I think what I was hearing today from the prosecution is they're assuming that happened because the argument would be there was no outgoing calls to emergency services. Although it seems to be complicated a little bit because the defense was saying your medical examiner, right? The medical examiner said that we don't know how long it took for Celeste to succumb to her injuries, right? So this idea that you claim our client was watching her bleed out, it seems that it's complicated by the ME's testimony, right?
That's right. I mean, he testified the other day, either one of those two penetrating wounds that they attributed her death to, either one could kill somebody in, quote, minutes to an hour. That is a pretty wide window of time. And he simply can't say, and that's because of the advanced state of decomposition. She may have been dead for weeks to months before her body was found. We saw in very graphic imagery exactly what her body looked like when the pieces were found in body bags inside that vehicle. So he can't say which penetrating wound happened first. It took them about 3 months just to finalize their autopsy findings and confirm her cause of death. So he doesn't know what kind of instrument or weapon caused those.
Convenient? Maybe. Or maybe that's just how outdated security systems work. I don't know. But you're allowed to wonder. I certainly do. What we do have is this: phone records and Tesla data showing his vehicle and his phone left that house around 11:30 that night, roughly 90 minutes after Celeste arrived, and drove north toward Lake Kachuma. Her passport card was later found up there. Months later, her body wasn't found until September. Chopped apart, placed in the trunk of his Tesla, discovered only because that car had been towed. This is the part that's personal for me, and I don't say that lightly. I've covered a lot of cases on this channel, a lot of victims, but there's something about a 14-year-old girl being reduced to pieces in a car trunk, months after the people who loved her stopped hearing from her. That sits differently. That doesn't leave you. Now here's the breadcrumb, because this case is full of them. The medical examiner testified he can't say for certain how long it took Celeste to die from her injuries. Could have been minutes. Could have been an hour. He can't even confirm which wound came first because of how decomposed her body was by the time it was found. Weeks, maybe months. So ask yourself, if nobody knows exactly what happened in that house, why is the defense already building a self-defense argument? What do they know that we don't? And that Uber driver everyone assumed would confirm the timeline? He told police he has no memory of the ride at all. Can't confirm he dropped her off. Can't confirm the pickup.
Absolutely. I was wondering last week, as the prosecution was calling their witnesses for this preliminary hearing, are we going to hear from that Uber driver at any point? You know, we've heard about that piece of the investigation for months now, that an Uber picked up Celeste in Lake Elsinore, where her family lives, and then dropped her off at David's home, just about 80 miles away in the Hollywood Hills. We haven't heard from this Uber driver yet. Well, that came up today in court. Apparently, LAPD did interview that Uber driver, and he denies having any recollection of that trip. He cannot definitively confirm that he dropped her off at that time, just after 10 p.m. that night, and he does not remember picking her up or driving her there. That is absolutely a hole in what the prosecution has been alleging for months now.
And no surveillance footage of her showing up or him being at the house, which, if I'm reading it correctly, again, seems to be problematic, which I know I'm jumping around a little bit because I do want to get a little bit back into what the prosecution was arguing with Detective Farrell. But something else that really stuck out to me, they are mounting, as far as I can see, and I think the court referenced it, a potential self-defense argument. I mean, when I'm reading these messages, there was an aspect to it, and correct me if I'm wrong, did Celeste physically, or are they trying to suggest Celeste physically threatened David, and that perhaps when she got to his house, he acted in self-defense? Am I looking at this completely wrong?
That's not a small gap. That's a hole big enough for a defense attorney to drive a truck through. This is exactly why the justice system frustrates people like us. Overwhelming evidence, thousands of messages, location data, a body found in his car, and still, the case has to survive a defense team hunting for every crack in the timeline, every missing camera, every fuzzy memory, before this even gets in front of a jury.
So what we just heard from the defense before breaking for lunch, defense attorney Marilyn Bednarski was laying out 5 issues that she has with the prosecution's case. Essentially, she is alleging they don't have any evidence proving murder. She says they only have evidence that can support concealment and transportation of a body. They also spent quite a bit of time attacking the 3 special circumstances surrounding that first-degree murder charge that make it eligible for the death penalty. It seems like there's a lot of focus on that, and of course that's lying in wait, murder for financial gain, or in this case, murder to prevent financial loss, which the prosecution has established is essentially the same thing, and murder of a witness to a crime, which the prosecution has established they can apply, even though there was no pending criminal investigation yet. So there's a lot of focus, I think, on invalidating those special circumstances and perhaps saving their client from the death penalty, which the DA, the LA County District Attorney Nathan Hochman, hasn't actually decided whether or not they're going to pursue. There wasn't a lot of back and forth in the defense team's closing statement relating to the charge for which I think there is the most hard evidence for, the continuous sexual abuse of a child under 14 charge. But 3 felonies here, including mutilation, unlawful mutilation of human remains, first-degree murder, and the continuous sexual abuse of a child charge. After prosecution wraps, I believe defense may have another opportunity to respond. So there's still a question mark on whether this is actually going to end today or if this might continue into Tuesday morning.
Julia Dang, thank you so much for coming on. I really, really appreciate it. So after I finished up with Julia, this is what came out of court. The
judge held him to answer on all 3 counts. Special circumstances that make this eligible for the death penalty. Lying in wait. Murder for financial gain, because Celeste allegedly threatened his career and his relationships. Murder of a witness. Arraignment is set. A trial is coming. And David Burke, by every account from inside that courtroom, has sat through all of it stone-faced.
Attorneys. He's been sitting in his usual seat at the end of the counsel table, kind of staring straight ahead for most of today. He did start taking notes. That was something we didn't see during the first 3 days of this preliminary hearing, but he was jotting something down as they were going back and forth talking about the text message conversations. Beyond that, we haven't heard much from him. He's very still. He's not moving much. He's not fidgeting the way that he was on Friday when testimony was dissecting the child sexual abuse material found on his phone. But it's very interesting to observe him. I've had a couple hallway conversations during breaks with the courtroom sketch artist, and she agrees. I mean, in her words, she says, it's like he's off on a different plane.
Taking notes, barely reacting. While Celeste's parents sat feet away from him, hearing exactly how their daughter's final months were spent, we buried a 14-year-old girl in pieces. And the conversation right now, right this second, is about whether the man accused of doing it gets to claim he was the one in danger.
They methodically presented over 5 different days before Judge Olmeda the evidence that showed, and at this point we had to show it by probable cause. But by probable cause, and I would argue by an overwhelming amount of probable cause, and we will eventually prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. It followed the timeline of the interactions between Celeste Rivas Hernandez when she started as a 12-year-old, then a 13-year-old, then a 14-year-old who never got to see her 15th birthday. Because in the intervening time where she had these interactions with Mr. Burke, he engaged in this sexual conduct with a 13-year-old repeatedly, over and over again. This came out in text messages that were presented, in videos and photographs that were presented to the judge that showed this sexual activity. Ms. Silverman methodically tracked the timeline of their interactions during 2022, 23, 24, 25, that eventually led to the time where Celeste Rivas Hernandez went over to Mr. Burke's house in the Hollywood Hills on April 23, 2025, and has never been heard of again. But what Ms. Silverman and her team were able to show to Judge Olmedo is that on April 23, 2025, what actually happened was the brutal and horrific murder of Ms. Hernandez, and thereafter, over the ensuing 5 months, how her body was chopped up, left in the front trunk of a Tesla, only to be discovered on September 8th, 2025, after the car, and this is Mr. Burke's car, had been towed to a tow yard.
Tell me in the comments, do you think the defense actually believes in that self-defense angle? Or is this just about planting doubt in a jury pool that hasn't even been picked yet? Because I have my own answer, and I don't think you're going to like it any more than I do.